This is the War Room Roundtable podcast, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant businessmen and women on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on the road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their successes into your life and business. The War Room Roundtable is brought to you by your hosts, Jason Miller, CEO of Strategic Advisor Board, and Phillip Lanos, CEO of Own the Rhythm, and former podcast host for Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. Welcome to the War Room. John, it's a pleasure to have you here. How you doing?
You're doing great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We like to kick things off on the show by asking if you have family members who have been entrepreneurs or business owners, maybe even creatives. Is that part of your origin story at all?
It's not actually. So I did not come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I would say in general a pretty conservative. And I'm the youngest of four, and I'm late 50s, and so my parents were Depression era kids, World War II vets, and I think pretty modest expectations and stuff. And so really like thinking big and betting on yourself were kind of concepts that was not necessarily in our vernacular, kind of the ethos of how I grew up and stuff.
Yeah, and that is interesting to know because you've worked with like Microsoft, Walmart, Nordstrom, T-Mobile. We're talking household names, right? So where does this come from for you? Was it because those concepts are so foreign that you were committed to exploring them, or something else?
Well, it comes from a lot of places, right? It's tough to boil down into one piece. I studied industrial engineering in college. I went to Oregon State University. I was very fortunate to get to go there. And what I became interested in was like this intersection of people and work and productivity and technology and strategy. And so I've always approached things in kind of a multidisciplinary, multi-perspective manner. And I was just fortunate enough to have a set of experiences in my career that kind of built on and fed upon those. And it also required me to travel and see the world a lot. And so I got to really love, the adventure of travel and working with other organizations. I've, to some degree, always been in consulting in my career. I've always had clients. And so that empathy of trying to understand the other party, quickly figuring out how to add value, trying to understand like, why are they stuck? Like, what's in the way? And then applying kind of these multidisciplinary levers to help them achieve their goals. Like, that's kind of the common theme that I've done across my entire career. And I've just, had the opportunities, like I've been able to build kind of my own brand. And I was as you know, I was a early executive at Amazon. I was a partner at a consulting firm for 12 years after that. And I just kind of came to realize like, hey, my next step was, just kind of having my own brand. And that was a pretty easy transition at that point in my career. But I never started off as like thinking of myself as an entrepreneur. I like to help companies innovate, how to serve customers better, how to grow, how to build new business models, how to compete in new ways in, kind of the digital era, right? And I just have figured out how to do that in many different contexts, and I have had the opportunity to work with several great brands, and I just keep learning along the way.
Got it. So, well, like most stories, it sort of just happened that way while you were trying to just do what you had to do in life.
Exactly. Like, looking backward, you can kind of see the connection, but I've never had too much more than, I kind of think of year-long plans. And so that the way I plan my business and what I want to accomplish is I kind of think 1 year out, have some objectives, and then I kind of work backwards from like, okay, what do I need to do to get those things done? And that's kind of how I've managed my career, for better or worse. I'm not proposing that that's the right way to do it, but that's kind of how I've done it.
Did you have sort of an ambition at any point in your career before getting bigger names to be like, oh, I want to work with Walmart one day? Or did that ever
No,
cross your mind at all?
I was always more interested in the quality of the problem, like how interesting is the scenario to do, and that always just put me into great places and everything. And the companies that I worked with put me in situations where I got to work on hard problems with great brands, and then I just got good at finding companies and helping them relate to like, hey, what I help leaders do and companies do fits you to a T. I live in, primarily I live in Seattle, Washington, which is just an incredible area with incredible brands and kind of an ethos of innovation and reinvention and technology capability. And so that ecosystem, I've had the advantage of being part of that ecosystem, and a lot of those brands come from that area.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the way that you see business with the idea of looking at the problem and focusing on that, because a lot of people do fall in love with their products, their services, some even their personal brand, and completely lose sight of how important the problem is in that equation. How far back does this go for you? Being able to tap into, oh, this is like, I need to focus on the problem. How can you trace that back to where you first started thinking that way?
I think that really is the basis of engineering backgrounds and disciplines. You get really good at decomposing a situation into smaller chunks and understanding root cause and understanding both the flow and kind of mathematics is essentially the language of describing situations and change and stuff. So how do you use the right math models to understand a situation? And so I became versed pretty early through both education and my career of like, how do you break problems down? And I think kind of in the last, call it 15, 20 years of my career, it's more about how do you integrate back up, right? How do you figure out the right strategy, what we want to do, and crisply describe the outcomes and the goals and the value propositions that you want to develop, and then work backwards to, well, here's how I'm going to build up to it. So, in one sense, my career was kind of like, first half was kind of deeply being able to understand situations, and the second half has been really about how do you create strategies, and the combination makes me a really good advisor to companies, because I help them both understand what they want to accomplish, and secondly, how do you go about doing it?
I see. Okay, so we reached the first part where I want to sort of break this apart and sort of map it out here. We're going to go ahead and give a shout out to a sponsor right now, but when we return from that, I actually want to hear Jason's reflections on sort of what you shared with us so far before we go back into asking more about what's going on, because I think there's a lot there that you said that I want to have Jason unpack. So our first break here is a big shout out to Kelly Gordon. If you haven't met her, and I hope that you do one day, John, but this is for all the listeners. Kelly Gordon in Cyberpreneur Inferno has essentially got your back when it comes to helping you break out of that burnout cycle. And this particularly goes to like agency owners and small businesses and people that are in that space. If the assumption is you were going to start your agency and get more money and more freedom, and that didn't happen, well, you can stay in that rat race and try to put in the 10,000 hours, or you can work with Cyberpreneur Inferno, which is a community that Kelly Gordon has put together that will help you with a proven method, get where you want to go. It's all about frameworks and methodologies, right? And you can get a 15% tuition discount just by letting them know you heard about them through the War Room. That's War Room 15. It's all love. That's why they're doing this. They are part of our community. They listen to the show too. So you're in good hands. And they have the 100-day guarantee they want to put in there. But with that said, you can go to get.cyberpreneurinferno.com. That's get.cyberpreneurinferno.com/4x4 method. That's 4x4. All right. So Jason, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what John has been breaking down about not only how businesses focus on problems per se, and how that really does unlock a lot of things. And that comes from a place of understanding things deeply, but also sort of watching a story of someone who came from not entrepreneurs, right? It's just general hardworking people like anyone else, then launching and going the distance and reaching levels with like being an early partner with Amazon and, big household name brands, and what that did, all while he originally intended to have an engineering background. And you never know where life takes you. And it's one of those classic stories we've seen. So I'd love to hear sort of your take on that.
Well, I look at it this way. We go through life experiences, right? So like we could synergize our experience almost, just they're different paths, right? So I spent 23 years in the military. While you spent your time doing the things you were doing, I was growing businesses in the military side by side, doing that too, right? Why? Because we compartmentalize things, right? And to me, like the work you and I do is very, very similar. The way we do it could be different, but the work we do is the same. And for me, like most businesses, and I'm sure you've seen this 1,000 times, they think they have a problem, but really there's 4 real problems stacked up over in the corner here that they've been ignoring. And they've not learned how to compartmentalize all these things and, succinctly solve problems through a process. Business is a process. That's all it is. It's very mechanical. I don't care what anybody says. You don't got to love it and fall in love with it. And it's your baby and all. It can be very mechanical. And in the consulting world, you can like take people through that process very mechanically, and the business will do its thing. It'll run itself. It's when you put the people in there, that's when it screws it all up. Right. So that part of it right there that you've done with a lot of the clients that you work with, I'm sure is very similar to what I do. And, we need more of that. We need more of the experience driven stuff, right? Because there's a lot of people that have came into our space over the last 1.5 or 2 years that magically know how to grow businesses now. And coaches, I call them COVID coaches. And that's damaged our businesses quite a bit. I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen it, but we sure have seen it. LinkedIn's flooded with it.
Yeah, it really, I have seen it and absolutely understand what you're saying. I don't feel too much of the impact of that, but I'm sure that it's very real. Yeah.
Yeah. What's more frustrating than anything to know that there's people out there that aren't qualified to do those things, when there's folks like, like Phillip, he's, the absolute consummate brand expert, right? You do the consulting work. I do the consulting work. I've been doing it for years and years and years. And for me, it's just irritating that it even exists, period. It's not that I end up getting clients that went through a bad experience with somebody else, right? Yeah. And that's irritating, right? But that's where people like you need to come along and be a part of that too, and get people out of that. It's okay to be skeptical, but there are really people like us that want to help people, right? And not just out for the money of it all. So, but when I listen to your story of everything, all of our stories just seem to parallel together. It's just a different storyline, right? pretty much.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that social media platforms have democratized sort of the ability for people, for anybody to say they're in business, and for anyone to tap in and message people and flood the market. Same thing happened in the music industry, right? Now it's happening in business because entrepreneurship is sexy and it's the in thing now. Now you yourself have put in the work and built up the reputation, as we've seen through your story. And we sort of glided through that because there's no way we could encapsulate all your years at all these companies, working partnered in tandem with them over time. But what I want to know is, if you step back for a second and look at that, if you had not associated with those major brands, would you look at your work the same as you do now?
Yeah, great question. So I was a partner at Arthur Andersen in the late 90s, early 2000s. I got to be, as you said, I was an early executive at Amazon. I led the launch of the marketplace business. So that's third party selling at Amazon.com. Today, that's over 58% of all units shipped and sold, over 3 million sellers on that platform. When I left Amazon in late 2005, I had a client at the Gates Foundation. This was 4 or 5 years after I left Amazon. And he pulled me into his office one day and said, you do a great job of kind of delicately taking the little principles and anecdotes and mechanisms from Amazon and inserting them into our work. And I think you ought to write a book about it. And the smartest thing I did was talk him into being my partner on the books. And so we released the first edition of The Amazon Way. We released the third edition just a year ago. So it's Amazon Way, about Amazon's leadership principles. We've sold over 200,000 copies of this book. And it's really a greenfield set of topics, because whether these are the right principles for you or not, thinking through a more holistic and tangible set of principles, not rules, but principles, things we ascribe to, how we work, what we prioritize, how we make decisions. I think any business, any team can improve if they reflect upon, well, what's our perspective relative to that, right? And working at Amazon completely sharpened kind of my critical thinking and having an eye towards distinctive features, distinctive value propositions, distinctive techniques on how to rethink, whether it's who the customer is, what we're proposing to them, or how to solve a problem, how to improve service. Like Amazon just went about it with a different eye of both detail and insights. And that definitely made me a better advisor today. And so today, I write a newsletter called the Digital Leader Newsletter. I write my books. I do keynotes. I do advisory work. And anywhere along that line, my whole goal is to give you tools and thinking and mechanisms that you can put to work so that you can think through this for yourself. And that to me, so that point of time at Amazon was really critical in kind of taking some perspectives and really putting a flavor of like how to really get clear and concise and differentiated in everything that you do.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah, it's like you can have the same career, but the insights you gained from watching a company that was at a pinnacle, not only in tech and in growth, but in .coms. And it was just such a perfect meld. And you happened to be in the room doing work with them, how it shifted the way you saw things.
Yeah, I was an employee. I wasn't a consultant at Amazon. So I was a senior leader there. And yeah, it really was this is the early 2000s, right? And so it was a very different company then. And we were really figuring out like what are our leadership principles and how do we compete and what type of company are we? And so it was a really formational time into Amazon. And although they've changed 10,000 times since I've been there, how they think about leadership, how they think about solving problems, how they work together. It's the exact same playbook. And I think that's been one of the real powers of their leadership principles and of their culture, is how they go about it is very consistent. And that's what's allowed them to grow to be such a big company today, but in relative terms, not bureaucratic, still entrepreneurial, still a place where people can get great work actually done and not just be impeded by bureaucracy.
Did you ever get a chance to meet or talk or shake hands with Bezos early on?
Oh, it went. I had the opportunity to have many great lectures from Jeff Bezos, and I traveled a bunch with Jeff and everything. And I thought he was just a fabulous strategist and a really incredible operator, and I think today, it's really easy to snipe at, one of, if not the world's richest man or whatever, but it's like, people forget, like he bet on himself. He walked away from an incredible job at D.E. Shaw, and it didn't come early for Amazon, and everything, right? It took 10 or 15 years before the flywheel really took effect. And he operated the same way when things were kind of, when the stock market was down as when it was up. He was just he was a tremendous problem solver, and he was really at his best when, he liked to really jump in and help, figure out the situation and solve problems.
I love that, man. It's great to hear that. If you have, because you do, let's say you have the listeners right now on the edge of their seats, right? And they've seen your work, they've seen the journey that you've shared with us here. Now the moment is, do you have anything that you want to leave behind? Is like, look, this is the bottom line. Whether you have major brands or not associated with you, when it comes to the work, this is really what it is. Those are my 2 cents. What is that for you in this moment right now?
Well, I think people they spend too much time contemplating the current situation and complaining about the current situation and describing the problem, and not enough time describing, well, what's the future state you want, right? Amazon calls this working backwards. So start with the customer and the customer experience that you want, and then work backwards to how you do that. And that technique of, yes, you need to understand the current situation, but what's harder and more important is actually being able to deeply describe, not casually describe, deeply describe, how do you want it to work, and then have the skills to actually figure out, like, well, what's our path towards getting there? And that to me is where is true innovation, because you actualize, like, okay, this is what I want to build, and then you have the skills to be able to actually build it, right? Build it through others, build it through your team, use technology, all the supply chain tools, all of those things to actually do it. And so I think the general point that too many people miss is how do you, they complain about the current state too much, right? They complain about not being able to do something, or the problems going. Well, tell me what the future state needs to look like, and then we can figure out together solutions in order to get there.
I see. So you should boldly assert the ideal scenario, and then reassess the difference, the delta, right, between current state and future state, and then use every resource at your disposal to close that gap every step of the way as soon as you possibly can.
I love that, Phillip. Bold. What did you say? Boldly?
Yeah.
But boldly describe.
Yeah, boldly describe.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's exactly it. That is exactly it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of techniques from Amazon in doing that. I describe them in the Amazon Way book. I write about them in my newsletter, the Digital Leader newsletter. So there's a bunch of techniques, but it all gets to, as you said, like, boldly describe the future state, and then have the multidisciplinary skills of knowing how to get there.
Yeah. No, I love this, and we're really.
Let me just add this too, though, because all of that being said, then you have to actually action. Right?
Right.
You actually have to take the action. And a lot of people get stuck in that first part, right? And then they get stuck in the action. They don't take the action afterwards, right?
And it's persistent and consistent action, and realizing that,
absolutely,
if you did describe a bold future state, you're not going to get it right the first time. It's going to take a lot of iteration to get there.
right.
And so it is about taking action, Jason, and not being, satisfied with the status quo, but really, especially in bigger companies, like what they're just masters of is kind of complaining about the status quo and not doing anything about it.
It's the sheep's mentality, right?
Yeah, man. No, this is already turning like the volume all the way up. I hope people have been listening. We're at the latter half. Really, there's very, very little left to do. Again, want to take a quick shout out for Rogue Publishing Partners, also part of the community. We only do people who are in our community who actually listen to the show. It's very close group, and one of those people is Shelby Joe Long with Rogue Publishing Partners. They are your quintessential turnkey solution for publishing, whether you're an entrepreneur, a coach, a consultant, what have you. If you don't have that resource, one of the best ones we can recommend is working with Rogue Publishing Partners. Just go to roguepublishingpartners.com. If you don't have a resource, I'm telling you, you cannot go wrong. They will get you the results you're looking for. They've already done it many times over. With that said,
I've written 3 books, and you have to have a partner with you to do it. It's a hard journey. You don't want to do it by yourself. Even if you know what you're doing, you don't do it by yourself.
Hey, I really appreciate that. I was going to say, I want to roll out the red carpet for you too, and let people know, like, where do you want them specifically to go? You mentioned a few things earlier about your newsletter and where the book is.
Yeah,
but really, where do you want them to go? What's the call to action?
So, the Amazon way, available in Audible, Kindle, paperback. Find it at Amazon, The Amazon Way by John Rossman. My newsletter you can find on Substack. Subscribe for free. It's called the Digital Leader Newsletter. Or LinkedIn, John Rossman. I have a website, rossmanpartners.com, but it's probably easier to just find me on LinkedIn if you want to say hi.
Right on. I think there's been incredible learning in this conversation, lots of value. It's not often people get a chance to not only hear with a strategist in real time what shaped them to be the professional they are, but also what they took away if they did have the chance to work with major names, and what that does to the kind of work that you're doing. So it's like, it's like throwing hot sauce on an already delicious taco. You just know it's going to just be a little spicier, but that makes a difference, right? So forgive me, it sounds like I'm hungry here.
You probably are after
it is a Friday, it is a Friday. But with that said, man, I can't thank you enough for bringing that energy. And I know, and I felt it the entire conversation. You were here to deliver value, and that kind of behavior, I think, is also indicative of the kind of consulting that you do, and where you are here to contribute and deliver value. You're not here to take, you're here to give. And that's the behavior that I saw exhibited throughout this entire conversation.
I had a business partner who always used to say, like, our job is never to maintain the status quo, right? And so you're always there, like, in big ways and small ways. You always have to figure out how to help move forward. So yeah, that's I think the way to operate, and it all comes back to you.
Man, I love it. I love it. It's tradition around here for Jason to close us out, so I'll let him do that. But I got to say, it was great talking to you.
Right on, Phillip. Thank you.
All right, let's roll out that grand finale first.
Oh, that's right. The grand finale. I didn't even bother asking. Wow, it really is 5:00 somewhere. So the grand finale. If you could have invited anybody, John, and I mean anybody, to this conversation today, just take a second and think about what we just covered. It was a large gamut, but it was focused on your journey. Who would you have loved to have had here with us today, and why them today?
So I'm going to take a minute on this. There's an obvious answer, which would be, Jeff Bezos, but he would have eclipsed me, and you never would have heard from me, right? But there's a deceased gentleman by the name of Peter Drucker, very famous management advisor, author, and I find the way he both thinks and then breaks things down into actionable, structures and rubrics and components and everything. I think he just really was a great thinker. And if I could be, just a fraction of what Peter Drucker has accomplished, that would be a big hallmark. But, Peter Drucker would be the person I'd choose to sit next to me in this conversation.
Man, I am a bookworm. It's something I try not to say to people because reading books is something a lot of people talk about. But Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker is by far something that everybody should have in their back pocket at any point in time if they're in consulting or leadership. It's just the real deal. And it's not much. It's a very thin book. And
it's timeless.
Yeah, and he worked with major publishers. How he got away with making a thin book, I don't know, because they like stuffing it with pages so that you could sell.
Well, my whole design principle for my books is to avoid what's called TLDR, right? So TLDR is too long, didn't read. And so I think the whole secret for a good business book is to actually make it thin, which is hard to do. And you don't repeat yourself. So too many business books are really one idea and they just go through it 10 times, right? To write a good book has to be thin and it has to be a set of ideas, each one talked about only once.
Yeah.
Under 200 pages always. Because you can read that on a flight.
TLDR,
that's exactly it. With a glass of wine.
That's right.
It's really 5 o'clock somewhere. Well, Jason, man, close us out. Let's
Well, hey, thanks for being here. It was a great conversation. If people didn't get anything from that, well, they were just sleeping. So there was a lot there to get from that. Go grab the book. I very rarely say that at the end, but I think there is some good value in what you got going on. And so go get that book and read it. Read it on your next flight.
That's right.
Appreciate you, John.
Thank you.
Take it easy, brother. Have a good weekend.
Right on. Have a great weekend. Real pleasure to meet you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the War Room Roundtable with your hosts, Jason Miller and Phillip Lanos. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and always remember, if you can dream it and believe it, then you can go achieve it. We'll see you in the next episode.